What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Real Horror. I'm Tensa, and today I want to talk about movies that we may or may not consider to be a part of the horror genre. One of the biggest debates among horror and general movie fans is what exactly qualifies as a horror film. It's actually one of my favorite things about the genre is that it can blend other genres into it so well, like drama, thriller, and even comedy. That, along with the content being presented ranging from murder to creepiness and the idea that the events can really happen, helps spark the debate. I believe that while some movies can find ways to be disturbing or scarily plausible, that does not necessarily make them a horror film and thus not technically part of the genre. So what constitutes a horror movie? Well, I brought up a few examples in my top 10 videos from November that I thought could or could not be classified as horror based on fans' opinions. I chose to call them horror because that's how they came off to me. To counterbalance them, I thought of several films that have been referred to as horror, but I personally don't see them as being such. Let's take a look. For the top 10 horror of the 1970s, I challenge people to tell me that Jaws is not a horror movie. I think many question this because of the way Spielberg directed it. It can come off as an action-adventure that follows a mismatched group of guys on the hunt for a beastly shark. While I can't deny it has those elements, it's a horror movie at the heart of everything. It is truly meant to frighten the viewer. For God's sake, it genuinely kept people from going into the ocean after its release in 1975. They were scared shitless at the thought of a giant great white shark eating them alive even in the shallowest parts of the ocean. The opening with Chrissy being attacked is absolutely horrifying, with us unable to see the shark, but her reactions and inability to escape sell the terror. The movie preys upon our fears of the unknown and what we can't see, being just as scary as what we do see. Needless to say, when you do see the shark, it's crazy. I've always loved the shot where you kind of get your first good look at the shark attacking the instructor. We see it, he can't, and we know just from the quick glimpse that he's totally screwed. The kills are fairly graphic too, between seeing that instructor get it, Quint getting chomped on at the end, and that poor little Kittner boy who is viciously attacked.
And I am not going to stand here and see that thing cut open and see that little Kittner boy spill out all over the dock.
It even has some excellent jump scares.
Come on down and chump some of this shit.
And let's face it, the shark in Jaws is a scary villain despite simply being a natural predator of the sea. If you've seen the movie, I can't imagine that whenever you enter the ocean, you don't think about Jaws, along with that infamous John Williams score that makes you want to immediately get out. Now there's Predator. I felt like I had to defend this one a little bit more than Jaws because it seems like viewers see it as more of an action sci-fi. Again, I can agree with both of those assessments, but I can't imagine not also looking at it as a creature feature horror movie. It's reminiscent of Alien, where for all intents and purposes, it's a slasher movie with an extraterrestrial as the villain. Yes, it 100% starts as an action movie with Schwarzenegger doing his 80s shoot 'em up in the jungle, but his group finds a body that's been skinned alive, and soon after they are hunted down and killed off one by one until there's the final guy who defeats the threat. Whether you find them scary or not, I think a slasher movie is always considered to be a horror movie. And whether you want to agree with me or not, Predator is an action sci-fi slasher. Change my mind. Finally, I'll mention The Silence of the Lambs. I don't think people want to call this a horror movie because it's genuinely well made and won a bunch of Academy Awards. Something that prestigious could never be lowered to the level of being a horror film. Well, guess what? Fuck you, it is. The main character is hunting down a serial killer who kidnaps, holds captive, kills, and steals the skin of women. Buffalo Bill was inspired by real-life killer Ed Gein, who did the same thing. We spend quite a bit of time with Bill too. We get to know how he commits his crimes and the process he puts his victims through. The audience gets to witness just how terrifyingly fucked up he is. Then we have Hannibal Lecter, who, while locked up, is just as scary as Bill because of how cunning and manipulative he is. That and he eats people. So you have two killers who you get to know, scare you, and do reprehensible things to their victims. And you want to say, no, this film is just a dramatic thriller. It is an investigative thriller with some drama thanks to Clarice Starling as the protagonist. But the scenes with Buffalo Bill are scarily realistic at times with a woman trapped with a psychopath. Also, Hannibal's entire escape scene is incredibly brutal and horrific with some disturbing imagery. He's a slasher too. Sorry, not sorry. Now let's switch gears and dip into movies that could be labeled horror but don't register with me as such. I first want to talk about the movie that really ignited the fire in me to have this discussion. It's easily in my top 10 all-time favorite movies, but it did not make my top 10 horror of the 1990s. I'm talking about Seven. Brilliantly made by David Fincher with awesome performances from Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. It deals with a murderer going around New York City, killing people in ways that reflect one of the 7 deadly sins they represent. You would think with that content alone, I would say, oh, definitely a horror movie. But I gotta be honest, I do look at it as more of a crime thriller. Now I know some of you are gonna blow me off after I just got done talking about Silence of the Lambs being horror, even though it's also a crime thriller, but there's a different tone for me with Seven. It deals with these horrific murders, but I don't think they're necessarily focal points, as we're only seeing the aftermaths, more so following the investigative side with Detective Mills and Somerset. The deaths are disturbing, but I don't believe they invoke fear in our protagonists, just a stronger drive to catch the killer. We follow Mills and Somerset, two completely different detectives who have their own ideologies and ways of going about the investigation. Our focus is more on them as characters as we watch their growth as partners on the case. The kills act more as a means to build up their frustration with being unable to find the killer as opposed to being events that scare us. That isn't to say the intense graphic nature of the kills don't disturb the viewer, especially Sloth.
You got what you deserved.
He's alive! He's alive! Cocksucker's alive!
However, in the end, it works for me more as a gritty noir thriller than a horror movie. Then you have Nightcrawler, which is one hell of a crazy film. You've got Lou, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who is our protagonist but also works as a creepy antagonist. He gets involved in the very real business of LA cameraman finding the best stories, car accident fatalities, fires, shootings, etc., filming them in order to get the first footage available that can be sold to the highest bidding news outlet. Lou becomes obsessed and goes to some despicable levels in order to get the best footage first and sell it. There are some gruesome sights that he takes advantage of, but shit gets out of control when he witnesses a murder. This can be tense and sometimes uncomfortable thanks to Lou being so goddamn unhinged. He lacks any sense of morality or empathy, and he's just a scummy, jealous asshole. And yet sometimes you're torn on whether or not you want him to succeed because of how dedicated he is. Even with a psychotic main character gathering footage of horrendous acts, I don't perceive it as a horror movie. Horrific stuff happens and you see some really unnerving things, but there is no real intent to scare you, just keep you on the edge of your seat with suspense. Finally, I thought of the more recent Parasite, the surprise hit from Korean director Bong Joon-ho that I heard many describing as horror. It starts off innocently enough with a family struggling to make money in the slums. Through a series of events, they become involved with a high-class rich family. However, halfway through, it takes a turn. I am not going to spoil the twist it takes because I highly recommend you check it out for yourself. But it becomes really suspenseful with an ending that will catch you completely off guard. Even with the twist, I don't think Parasite ever qualifies as being a horror film. There are some creepy moments as you start to guess and inevitably find out what the fuck is going on, but it's more shocking than anything. It's like a family drama that takes a wrong turn, but never dips into full-blown horror. There are plenty of other movies that could be up for debate as being horror, but those were the few that I wanted to tackle. One word I think I kept repeating throughout the latter films was suspense. They're suspense thrillers, suspense dramas. Am I splitting hairs? Shouldn't I just consider suspense to be a part of or a subgenre of horror? Yes and no. Horror does build suspense, but it also has the intent to strike fear into a person. The movies I noted as not really being horror in my book don't necessarily feel like their intention is to strike fear. Now, does a movie like Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan build suspense or scare anyone? Hell no, but it still wants to scare. Seven, Nightcrawler, and Parasite have elements that can be disturbing, weird, creepy, or unsettling. However, in my personal opinion, I don't consider them to be a part of the horror genre based on their content and execution. Don't let this train of thought take anything away from them. I think all three are amazing movies that all of you should watch if you haven't already. While horror is my favorite genre, I am a fan of film in general. I just so happen to take horror the most seriously. Declaring something to be or not be included in a specific genre is not the end of the world. It boils down to how you look at it and what vibes it gives off to you. There are those that are blatantly horror, but the ones that blur the line can be the most fun because it means means someone had a different experience with the same movie you both watched. And I think that's the beauty of film, being able to discuss interpretations with others in healthy debates. But let me know your thoughts. In your opinion, what makes a movie horror? Do you agree with the ones I thought were and were not? Or do you dispute some of my claims? Let's open this up for a discussion in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and follow my Twitter and Instagram. Links to those are in the description. Next week is Christmas, and I've got a little surprise gift, but you'll have to wait until then to unwrap it. So until next time,